The mushroom cloud over New Thessaly still glowed against the amber sky when Commander Vex Night Whisper received the transmission. 15 million souls, gone in an instant. The Korthak hegemony's diplomatic vessel had delivered the killing blow disguised as a peace offering. Their antimatter payload, hidden within what should have been medical supplies for the war-torn colony. Night Whisper's knuckles whitened around the command chair's armrests as the holographic display flickered, with casualty reports. His daughter's university, his brother's research facility, his mentor's retirement home, all reduced to radioactive glass in the span of 17 seconds. Sir, the Galactic Arbitration Council is demanding our immediate withdrawal from Korthak. Space, reported Lieutenant Kess Graveheart, her voice tight with barely suppressed rage. They're calling it an unfortunate miscommunication and offering reparations. The bridge of the Terran dreadnought Inexorable Dawn fell silent, except for the steady thrum of the fusion cores. Every officer present had lost someone on New Thessaly. The Korthak had chosen their target with surgical precision, not a military installation, but a civilian colony housing the families of Terra's finest military minds. Night Whisper stood slowly, his weathered face carved from granite. At 53, he had fought in 7 wars and negotiated 12 peace treaties. He had been humanity's premier diplomat in uniform, the man who turned enemies into allies through wisdom and patience. That man died with New Thessaly. Signal. The fleet, he commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge like a death knell. All vessels are to ignore the withdrawal order. We advance on Korthak Prime. Commander, Graveheart hesitated. Our orders from Earth Command specifically. Earth Command is 3 weeks away by quantum relay. By the time they receive word of this atrocity, 15 million more humans could be dead. Night Whispers, eyes fixed on the tactical display, where the Korthak homeworld pulsed like a diseased heart. The hegemony believes they can hide behind diplomatic immunity while committing genocide. They are mistaken. The Korthak had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 8 centuries through a combination of technological superiority and political manipulation. Their crystalline ships moved like living things through space, their weapons capable of turning entire star systems into graveyards. Most species had learned to appease them rather than fight. Humans had been different. When first contact occurred 40 years ago, Terra had matched the hegemony's aggression with tactical brilliance. The resulting war lasted 3 years and ended in stalemate, followed by an uneasy peace that had held for nearly 4 decades, until today. The diplomatic corps will have our heads, muttered Commander Wraith Stormcaller from the communications station. The peace accords. The peace accords died with New Thessaly, Night Whisper interrupted. Ready all weapons. Set course for the Korthak homeworld. It's time they learned why humanity doesn't forgive genocide. As the massive fleet of Terran warships pivoted toward their target, Ambassador Lyra Moonweaver's desperate transmission crackled. Through the static from the orbital diplomatic station, she was screaming about violations of interstellar law, about the delicate balance of power, about the consequences of abandoning diplomacy. Night Whisper silenced the transmission with a gesture. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. The Korthak had made their choice when they murdered innocents under a flag of peace. Now humanity would make theirs. The die was cast, and the galaxy would burn. The Korthak homeworld of Velthoran glittered like a jewel against the void, its crystalline cities refracting the light of twin suns into prismatic rainbows. Orbital. Defense platforms hung in perfect geometric formation around the planet, their energy shields creating an impenetrable shell of crackling force. Commander Night Whisper studied the tactical hologram with the patience of a predator. The Korthak believed their defenses impregnable. They had never been tested by human ingenuity born of absolute fury. Fleet status report, he commanded. 17 dreadnoughts, 43 cruisers, 108 destroyers, and 200 fighter wings, replied Captain Zara Ironvoid from the tactical station. The largest human fleet ever assembled outside the Sol system, sir. Admiral Corvin Duskrender's face materialized in the communication array, his expression grim. "Vex, I'm ordering you to stand down. The Galactic Council has unanimously condemned your actions. We're facing complete isolation if you proceed." Night Whisper didn't look away from the display. "How many council members have children, Corvin?" "That's not how many have ever watched their offspring burned alive by those they trusted." The words came out like shards of ice. "The Council speaks of law and order, while genocide hides behind diplomatic pouches. They can condemn us from the comfort of their ivory towers. I'll mourn our isolation from my daughter's grave." The connection terminated. On the bridge, the tension was palpable. These officers had served under Night Whisper for years, had seen him negotiate ceasefires, while his ship took fire, had watched him spare enemy vessels when victory was assured. The man standing before them now was someone else entirely, someone forged in the nuclear fire of New Thessaly. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Arya Shadowbane spoke from the sensor array. "Korthak defensive fleet is moving to intercept. 300 vessels of various classes. Their flagship? The Threnody of Stars, sir. Executor Vashatar commanding." Night Whisper's lip curled. Vashatar, the architect of the New Thessaly massacre, the Korthak diplomat who had personally delivered the poisoned peace offering. The creature's hexapedal form and chitinous carapace had haunted his dreams for 3 sleepless nights. "Open a channel to all ships," Night Whisper commanded. "Fleet-wide broadcast." When the connection established, he stepped forward, his voice carrying across 200 vessels. "Warriors of Terra, today we face an enemy that believes human mercy is human weakness. They mistake our desire for peace as inability to wage war. 15 million of our brothers and sisters cry out for justice from the void." On screens throughout the fleet, hardened veterans straightened. Many wept openly. The Korthak have never faced humanity unleashed. They have never seen what we become when everything we cherish is taken from us. Today, they learn. Today, we teach them why our species conquered a galaxy of predators before we ever left our home system. The channel crackled with voices of agreement, with promises of vengeance, with the battle cries of a species pushed beyond all reason. "All vessels, attack formation Ragnarok. Target their command ships first. Leave the orbital platforms for last. I want Velthuran to watch their protectors die before we settle accounts." As the human fleet surged forward, weapons charging, Night Whisper felt the last vestiges of his diplomatic career crumble to ash. Ambassador Moonweaver was right. This would shatter the careful balance of galactic politics. The peace accords would become historical footnotes. But as the first Korthak vessels exploded in brilliant bursts of plasma and debris, as their supposedly invincible shields collapsed under human innovation and rage, Night Whisper felt something he hadn't experienced since receiving news of his daughter's death. Satisfaction. The war to end all wars had begun, and humanity intended to finish it. The battle for Velthuran raged across 3 orbital zones as human and Korthak fleets clashed in a symphony of destruction. Plasma cannons painted the void in brilliant streaks, while torpedo barrages exploded like dying stars against energy shields. Commander Night Whisper watched the tactical display with clinical detachment as his fleet carved through Korthak defensive lines like a molecular blade through silk. 40 years of preparation for a war they hoped would never come had produced weapons the enemy couldn't comprehend. The Terran destroyer Vengeance Born rolled beneath a Korthak cruiser's primary beam, its adaptive armor dispersing the energy, like water over stone. Return fire from its particle accelerators tore through the alien vessel's crystalline hull, venting atmosphere and crew into the vacuum. "The Korthak are regrouping near the 3rd moon," reported Captain Ironvoid. "Executor Vashatar is calling for reinforcements from the outer colonies." "Let them come," Night Whisper replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Every ship they send is one less to massacre human civilians." On the main screen, the Threnody of Stars emerged from behind Velthuran's largest orbital station, its biometallic hull rippling with bioluminescent patterns that indicated extreme agitation. The massive command ship bristled with weapons that could reduce planetoids to cosmic dust. "Incoming transmission from the flagship," announced Lieutenant Graveheart. On screen, Executor Vashtar's insectoid features filled the display, mandibles clicking in what humans had learned to recognize as amusement. The Korthak's compound eyes reflected the light of burning ships. "Commander Nightwhisper," the alien's translated voice buzzed with harmonic overtones. "Your impressive tantrum has provided excellent data on human military capability. We thank you for this gift." "My gift is just beginning," Nightwhisper replied. "Surrender now and face trial for genocide. Continue fighting and face extinction." Vashatar's carapace shifted colors, a sign of laughter among his species. "You speak of extinction while floating in our space with your primitive vessels. Do you not comprehend the forces arrayed against you? The hegemony spans 400 systems. Terra controls barely 50. Numbers," Nightwhisper said quietly, "have never been humanity's strength." The transmission cut as the inexorable Dawn's main guns opened fire. Coherent energy beams designed to pierce stellar matter struck the Korthak flagship's shields, causing cascading failures across its defense grid. Other human dreadnoughts followed suit, focusing their fire on the command vessel. But Veshatar's confidence wasn't misplaced. As the human fleet pressed their attack, reinforcements began emerging from quantum tunnels. Korthak vessels from across the hegemony answering their leader's call. Within minutes, the odds shifted from 3-1 against humanity to 7-1. "Sir," Captain Shadowbane called out, "long-range sensors detect additional enemy fleets converging on our position. Over 1,000 ships." The bridge fell silent except for the sounds of battle raging beyond the hull. Every officer present understood the mathematics of their situation. They had come here to die, but they had also come to ensure the Korthak paid dearly for New Thessaly. "Signal all ships," Nightwhisper commanded. "Execute Protocol Omega." Graveheart's hands hesitated over her console. Protocol Omega was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a final gambit that could turn the tide of battle or doom them all. It had never been used in actual combat. "Sir, are you certain?" Nightwhisper thought of his daughter's last message, recorded just hours before the attack. She had been excited about her xenobiology research, optimistic about the future, certain that humans and aliens could build something beautiful together. That optimism died with New Thessaly. Now only vengeance remained. "Execute the protocol," he repeated. Across the human fleet, reactor cores began overloading in carefully controlled sequences, not to explode, but to create something far more devastating. The space between stars began to ripple as humanity unveiled its answer to overwhelming odds. The Korthak were about to learn why. Earth's children carried the genes of apex predators in their blood. Reality itself began to scream. Protocol. Omega's execution sent ripples through the fabric of space-time as 17 human dreadnoughts simultaneously engaged their experimental quantum displacement cores. The technology was theoretical madness made manifest, a deliberate corruption of the fundamental forces that held matter together. Commander Nightwhisper gripped his command chair as the inexorable dawn shuddered through dimensions that had no names. Around them, the Korthak fleet faltered as their sensors registered impossible readings. "Quantum displacement at 70%, reported Chief Engineer Maxim Voidwright, his voice tight with concentration. "The field generators are holding, but I'm reading massive instabilities in local spacetime." What the Korthak couldn't understand, what no species in the galaxy had ever conceived, was that humans had weaponized entropy itself. While others sought to harness order, humanity had learned to unleash chaos. The first Korthak vessels caught in the expanding quantum field simply ceased, not destroyed, not vaporized. They became probability, existing and not existing simultaneously until the universe resolved the paradox by choosing non-existence. Executor Vashitar's mandibles spread wide in what could only be terror as the threnody of stars found itself at the edge of an expanding zone, where physics had become optional. His voice crackled through the communication array, harmonic overtones replaced by static interference. What? What have you done? This violates every natural law. Natural law, Night Whisper replied with cold satisfaction, is a luxury for species that haven't had their children murdered by cowards hiding behind diplomatic immunity. The quantum field expanded like a cancerous bubble, consuming Korthak reinforcements as they emerged from their tunnel drives. Ships centuries old, representing the pinnacle of hegemony technology, flickered out of existence as causality collapsed around them. But Protocol Omega came with a price that Night Whisper had accepted the moment he gave the order. The quantum displacement field was growing beyond their control, feeding on the gravitational stress of Veltheron's twin suns. Soon, it would encompass the entire system. "Sir," Captain Ironvoid called out, her voice barely audible over the increasing spatial distortions. "The field's expansion rate is accelerating. We have perhaps 15 minutes before it reaches critical mass. 15 minutes to finish what they had started. 15 minutes to ensure the Korthak hegemony paid in full for their atrocity. The surviving enemy vessels, those lucky enough to be beyond the field's immediate reach, began retreating toward the system's edge in desperate flight. But Night Whisper wasn't finished with them. "All ships, prepare for final assault," he commanded. "Target the orbital defense platforms. If we're dying here, we're taking Veltheron's shields with us." What followed was less a battle than an execution. Human vessels, already committed to their own destruction, showed no regard for defensive tactics or survival. They threw themselves at the Korthak positions with suicidal fury, their weapons overcharged beyond safe parameters. The crystalline cities of Veltheron watched in horror as their supposedly impregnable defenses crumbled under the assault. Orbital platforms that had protected the homeworld for 8 centuries exploded in chains of fusion fire, their debris raining down on the planet's surface like meteors of judgment. As the last platform died, the quantum field reached the inner system's edge. Veltheron's twin suns began exhibiting signs of quantum instability, solar flares of impossible color, gravitational fluctuations that defied measurement. In his final transmission to the retreating Korthak fleet, Night Whisper's words carried, "Cross the dissolving spacetime like an epitaph for an entire star system. Tell your hegemony that humanity remembers. Tell them that mercy has a price, and when that price isn't paid, we collect in full. New Thessaly sends its regards, the Eye." Inexorable Dawn's hull began to phase between dimensions as the quantum field claimed its creators. But even as reality collapsed around them, the human fleet maintained formation, weapons firing until the very moment existence became uncertainty. The Korthak hegemony's greatest stronghold was about to become a monument to the consequences of pushing humanity too far. The quantum field's collapse sent shockwaves through hyperspace that could be felt across half the galaxy. Where the Veltheron system had existed for 4 billion years, now only a spherical void remained, a hole in space-time that bent light around its edges and whispered with the voices of 2 civilizations dead. On Earth, the Terran High Command watched the astronomical readings with a mixture of awe and horror. Admiral Corvin Duskrender stood before the holographic display that showed the expanding dead zone, his hands trembling as he processed the magnitude of what Night Whisper had unleashed. 17 billion Korthak civilians, reported intelligence. Director Naya Starhunter, her voice hollow. Gone, an entire star system simply erased from existence. And 15 million humans, added Fleet Commander Caius Doomforge quietly. Vex finally got his justice. The silence in the command center stretched like a held breath. The quantum weapon's existence had been known only to a handful of individuals, a theoretical doomsday device that was never supposed to be deployed. Now its terrible reality had been demonstrated to the entire galaxy. "Sir," a communications officer called out, "we're receiving diplomatic channels from everyone, the Zilithian Collective, the Morphic Territories, the Crystalline Conquered, Even the void touched are demanding explanations. Through the quantum-encrypted channels, humanity's oldest allies were voicing their shock and terror. The Zilithians, who had fought alongside humans for 3 decades, were formally requesting immediate cessation of diplomatic relations. The morphic territories were mobilizing their defensive fleets. Even species that had remained neutral in galactic conflicts were taking sides against Terra. But it was the message from the surviving Korthak hegemony that chilled every human heart. Executor Thainveer, Vashatar's successor, appeared on the main screen. Unlike his predecessor's arrogant bearing, this Korthak's carapace was pale with grief and rage. Behind him, the emergency command center on Korthak Secundus buzzed with frantic activity. People of Terra, Thainveer's voice carried harmonics, of mourning that translation software struggled to convey. You have shown us the face of monsters wearing the mask of civilization. 17 billion souls, artists, scientists, children who had never known war, erased because you could not accept the legitimate consequences of military action. Admiral Duskrender stepped forward. New Thessaly was a civilian target. New Thessaly was a military supply depot disguised as a colony. Thainveer's mandibles clicked rapidly. Every civilian there held military rank or supported the war effort. We targeted valid military infrastructure and you responded with genocide. Fucked. Words hit the command center like physical blows. Intelligence files flashed across screens as Director Starhunter's team worked frantically to verify the claim. Within moments, the horrible truth emerged. New Thessaly had indeed been reclassified as a military installation 6 months prior. The families living there were technically military dependents on a hardened target. The Korthak attack, while devastating, had been legal under the rules of engagement. Humanity's war of vengeance had been built on a lie. You call us murderers, Thainveer continued, while you corrupt the fundamental laws of physics to commit true genocide. You speak of justice while erasing star systems. The galaxy has seen your true nature now, and it will remember. The transmission ended, leaving Earth's leaders staring at the void where their greatest victory had become their most damning failure. What have we done? Whispered Commander Doomforge. As if in answer, new reports flooded in from across human space. Korthak. Revenge fleets were emerging from quantum tunnels at the edges of Terran territory. Not to conquer, to reciprocate. Every human colony, every outpost, every civilian settlement was now a target for the kind of absolute war that humanity had introduced to the galaxy. The Korthak had learned humanity's lesson well. Sometimes mercy was weakness, and weakness invited extinction. The war was no longer about New Thessaly or Velthurin. It had become about which species would survive to see the next millennium. And across the galaxy, ancient civilizations were choosing sides, not between right and wrong, but between different definitions of necessary evil. The Korthak retaliation came like clockwork death across human space. 12 colonies incinerated in the first wave, 23 in the second. By the third wave, over 200 million humans had joined the 17 billion Korthak civilians in the growing catalog of the dead. But the hegemony's response differed fundamentally from humanity's quantum genocide. They targeted military installations and strategic resources, leaving civilian populations with ultimatums: evacuate or face legitimate military action. The contrast was deliberate, calculated to demonstrate to the galaxy which species observed the laws of war. Admiral Duskrender stood in Earth's rebuilt Pentagon, watching tactical displays that painted human territory in the red of burning worlds. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Korthak were winning a propaganda war by being more humane than humanity had been. Status report, he commanded. 37 systems under direct assault, replied Captain Nova Grimreaper. Our defensive fleets are holding, but barely. The Korthak have committed everything. Even their deep space exploration vessels have been converted to warships. What about our allies? The silence that greeted this question spoke volumes. Director Starhunter pulled up diplomatic status reports that painted a picture of complete isolation. The Zilithian collective had formally withdrawn from their mutual defense pact. The morphic territories were actively providing intelligence to the Korthak. Even the crystalline Concord, humanity's oldest trading partners, had imposed economic sanctions. "We're alone," Starhunter said simply. "The galaxy has decided that genocide trumps all other considerations." "Can we blame them?" The voice came from an unexpected source, Dr. Elena Mindweaver, the quantum physicist who had designed Protocol Omega. She stood in the chamber's entrance, her security escort looking uncomfortable with their charge's presence. "Dr. Mindweaver," Duskrender said carefully, "you weren't scheduled for this briefing." "No, but I need to be here." She walked to the central display, her fingers tracing the void where Veltheron had been. "I created that weapon as a theoretical deterrent, something so terrible that its mere existence would prevent war. I never imagined. You never imagined someone would use it," Duskrender finished. "I never imagined it would work so perfectly." Her voice was hollow. "Do you understand what we've done? We didn't just kill 17 billion people. We created a dead zone in space-time that will exist for millions of years. We've literally scarred the universe itself. As if summoned by..." Her words, new data flooded the displays. The Veltheron void was growing, its gravitational anomalies affecting nearby systems. Trade routes that had existed for millennia were being abandoned as ships reported temporal distortions and reality fluctuations. Humanity hadn't just committed genocide. They had committed cosmocide. "There's something else," Dr. Mindweaver continued. "The quantum equations, they suggest that what we did isn't isolated. The destruction is propagating through dimensional layers we don't fully understand. Other realities, parallel universes, they're all being affected." The weight of this revelation settled on the room like a burial shroud. They hadn't just murdered 17 billion beings. They had potentially damaged the fundamental structure of existence itself. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. It's from the Eternal Arbiters." Every human in the room felt their blood turn to ice. The Eternal Arbiters were the galaxy's ultimate judges, beings so ancient and powerful that most species considered them mythical. They appeared only when cosmic law itself had been violated. The main screen flickered, then filled with something that hurt to look at directly, a being of pure energy and thought that spoke in harmonics that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the mind. "Children of Terra," the Arbiter's voice was the sound of stars being born and dying. "You have broken fundamental law. You have wounded reality itself in service of your rage. The price for such transgression has been set." "What price?" Duskrender managed to ask. "Isolation absolute. Your species is quarantined from the greater galaxy until such time as you prove worthy of rejoining civilization. Any human vessel that crosses your designated boundaries will be unmade. Any alien vessel that enters human space will be protected from your violence." The implications were staggering. Humanity was being sentenced to solitary confinement on a galactic scale. "How long?" Director Starhunter whispered. "Until you learn that some victories are indistinguishable from defeats. Until you understand that in seeking vengeance, you became the very monsters you sought to destroy." The transmission ended, leaving humanity alone with the consequences of their choices. Outside Earth's atmosphere, an invisible barrier began to form, a quantum wall that would keep humanity imprisoned with their guilt for however long it took them to remember what they had once been. 100 years had passed since the Veltheron incident became galactic history. On Earth, in the memorial gardens where New Thessaly's dead were remembered alongside Velthuran's billions, an old woman stood before a monument that bore no names, only numbers too large to comprehend. Director Lyra Peaceweaver, descendant of the ambassador who had tried to stop the massacre, carried the weight of her family's legacy in every step. As Earth's current representative to the Quarantine Council, she had spent decades trying to earn humanity's redemption. "The Eternal Arbiters have agreed to another review," she announced to the assembled council members. Around the table sat the leaders of a humanity that had been forced to look inward for a century, to confront what they had become in their moment of absolute rage. "What are their conditions this time?" asked Admiral Caney Shadowheart, whose great-grandfather had served under Commander Nightwhisper. "The same as always. Proof that we've learned to choose differently." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Humanity's quarantine had forced them to become everything they had once claimed to be. Without external threats to unite them, they had eliminated war among themselves. Without alien species to compete against, they had focused on healing their damaged worlds. Without the option of expansion, they had perfected the art of sustainability. They had become the peaceful, wise civilization they had always told themselves they were, but only after being stripped of the power to be anything else. "The Korthak hegemony has submitted their position paper," continued Director Peaceweaver. She activated the holographic display, showing the alien text that had been translated and retranslated by linguistic AIs for maximum accuracy. "They're still demanding reparations for Velthuran," Admiral Shadowheart noted. "No," Peaceweaver corrected. "They're demanding acknowledgement. They want humanity to formally admit that Velthuran was genocide, not a military action. They want us to own what we did." The silence stretched across the chamber. For a century, human diplomats had danced around that word, finding euphemisms and justifications. Excessive force, disproportionate response, tragic overreaction, but never genocide. "If we admit to genocide," said Counselor Marcus Truthseer, "we validate every action taken against us since, every burned colony, every dead human. It all becomes justified retaliation. And if we don't," Peaceweaver replied, "we remain exactly what we became that day, a species that commits atrocities and then lies to itself about their nature." The debate that followed lasted 3 days, broadcast live to every human settlement in the solar system. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone had expected, 347 for acknowledgement, 298 against, with 55 abstentions. Director Peaceweaver stood before the quantum communication array that would carry humanity's message beyond their prison walls. For the first time in a century, human words would reach alien ears with the Eternal Arbiter's permission. "To the survivors of Velthuran, to the Korthak hegemony, and to all species of the galaxy," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her words. "Humanity acknowledges our crime. We committed genocide against 17 billion innocent lives because we could not bear the loss of 15 million of our own. We chose vengeance over justice, annihilation over accountability." She paused, thinking of Commander Nightwhisper, whose name had become synonymous with humanity's darkest hour. "We cannot undo what was done. We cannot resurrect the dead or repair the wound we carved into reality itself. But we can ensure it never happens again. We can choose, every day, to be better than our worst moment." The transmission ended, carrying humanity's confession across the stars. The response came within hours, not from the Korthak, but from species humanity had almost forgotten. The Zilithians requested permission to resume cultural exchanges. The Morphic territories offered to share medical technology. Even new civilizations that had emerged during humanity's isolation extended cautious greetings. The Eternal Arbiter's final message was brief. "The quarantine is lifted. Rejoin the galaxy, children of Terra. But remember always the price of choosing vengeance over wisdom." As Earth's first starship in a century prepared for launch beyond the solar system, Director Peaceweaver stood at an observation deck watching its departure. The vessel carried no weapons, only scientists, artists, and diplomats. Humanity's promise to the galaxy written in the language of peaceful exploration. Commander Nightwhisper had chosen vengeance and doomed his species to a century of isolation. Now his descendants were choosing differently, not because they had to, but because they had finally learned to want to. The peace that had ended at Velthuran was beginning again, built not on the ashes of the dead, but on the hard-won wisdom of those who survived to remember why such choices should never be made again. In the memorial gardens, the numbers on the monument remained unchanged, a permanent reminder that some victories are indistinguishable from defeat, and some prices are too high for any civilization to pay. But beneath those numbers, new words had been carved. Never again, for any species, for any reason. Humanity had finally come home to itself.